What is going on, Colts Nation? It's Elijah from Sports Talk Indy, and finally being able to make a comeback. As I said before in previous videos, we have recently welcomed in our second child, and finding a rhythm and a routine to be able to sit down and make these videos has been quite the issue. But we are back, and hopefully back to a consistent rhythm. But for the time being, there's been so much that has happened throughout the Colts in the past several weeks, the past couple months. Anthony Richardson was benched. Joe Flacco came in, had two very bad starts. Anthony Richardson gets the job back, has a good week, has a Anthony Richardson week, which is which is an average week sprinkled in with drops of what could be explosive and dynamic and unbelievable plays. But today I want to talk about a massive problem that the Indianapolis Colts have, and if not addressed, is going to continue to plague the development of Anthony Richardson. It's going to continue to plague this offense and could affect things going forward for a long, long time. We're going to cover all that and more on this video. But for the time being, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, be sure to do so. We cover all things Colts, especially as we move to the later parts of the season. Normally, we do post every single day. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about what this glaring issue is for the Indianapolis Colts that, if not fixed, will continue to plague Anthony Richardson, and that is the tight end position. Now, when we talked about the beginning of the season, we were talking about the offseason and what the Colts should do. Tight end position wasn't necessarily one that I think many of us, myself, maybe I was the only one, weren't really looking at the tight end room as one that needed a lot of development. Now, obviously, there was a lot of free agent signings that we were hoping for. I think that I, along with a lot of other people, were okay with the idea of Brock Bowers being an Indianapolis Colt. He was heavily projected to go there. So obviously, yes, it was a room that needed upgraded, and it was a room that could use the upgrade. But it wasn't one that I definitely thought would be the bottom position. In fact, we all speculated that the defensive backfield would be a problem, and by all intents and purposes, the defensive backfield has actually been good. It's actually been good given what they have and given Gus Bradley's inconsistent play calls and schemes and all of that. It's been a manageable team. The defensive line has struggled. The linebacker room has struggled. All of these things have transpired. But the room that has needed the most help has been, since week one, the tight end room for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, going into the offseason, going into the beginning of the season, we thought that Jelani Woods was going to be that guy, right? He has a similar RAS to Anthony Richardson. In fact, I think he was a 10.0, and Anthony Richardson was also a 10.0. And so these two guys were really, really good, and Jelani Woods had, under Matt Ryan as quarterback, had a really, really good rookie season. And then injuries plagued him. He got injured again, was going to miss the entire season, and then was eventually cut by the Colts, given that this was either his last year or the year before his last year. So, Jelani Woods is out. But there were sprinkles last season of what could be a really, really good tight end room. And Anthony Richardson has relied heavily on that tight end room. He targets them whenever they're open. You can see that's a position he's looking for dump-offs and checkdowns. But the problem is that when you look at the most productive tight ends in football, you have to go all the way down to number 50 before you get an Indianapolis Colts player, and that is Mo Alley-Cox. Mo Alley-Cox is one that at least me, I was thinking might not even make the 61 is where Mo Alley-Cox ranks among NFL tight ends, and that is the top-ranked Indianapolis Colts tight end. But not only that, that's in like fantasy productivity, that's PPR, that's all of that. So, take that if you will, take it or leave it, whatever. But here's the interesting thing. If you look at the dropped metrics, the drop passes, the Colts tight ends, they have a percentage of team targets. Mo Alley-Cox gets 4.6%. Drew Ogletree gets 2.9%. Kylen Granson gets 4.6%. And Will Mallory gets 1.7%. But the problem is that they got 10 catchable targets is what Mo Alley-Cox gets. Drew Ogletree gets 8. Kylen Granson gets 7. And Will Mallory gets 3. But the problem is they're also not factoring in some of these targets that they're considering aren't the ones that are way more catchable than I think we give credit for. Some of them are the interceptions that Anthony Richardson threw that, honestly, having watched these over and over and over again, I do believe that a lot of them, especially on Kylen Granson, has been a problem. Now, Kylen Granson technically has 0 drops, but he's also not run a consistent percentage of the routes. But here, if we just look at receptions and yards total this season for the Indianapolis Colts total, Molly Cox has 117 yards. Drew Ogletree has 66 yards. Kylan Granson has 94 yards. And Will Mallory has 22 yards. Now, that is not Colts football. That is not even Shane Steichen football, because that is the football that I don't think that any of us want to see, because throughout Colts history, especially since the 2000s, like let's just reference recent history, Peyton Manning era on, right? 96 on. You had dominant tight end rooms. You had Dallas Clark being one of the best tight ends in that era, no glove Dallas. Just being absolutely incredible. And then going straight from that to Jack Doyle, love him or hate him, Jack Doyle was productive, and Jack Doyle was good. Then you had Eric Ebron for a season with Jack Doyle. That was an amazing couple of years, or at least season, and then obviously he fell off and played for the Steelers, had a good couple years there. But the problem that the Colts have now is they don't have that dominant tight end, and they don't really seem to be wanting to address this. I will give the Colts credit, which is something I try to do as much as possible. But I'll give the Colts credit. They've at least attempted to try and give Anthony Richardson weapons that they're going to have to develop with him. They're not giving him like Amari Cooper or DeAndre Hopkins, obviously. They're not giving him these vets, but they're giving him people to go alongside him. But they have not yet addressed the tight end room, and if they don't do it within the next couple of years, it could be detrimental, because you have to have that, especially in this run-first offense. Because it's not always going to be where you're going to be able to hit Alec Pierce, as we've already seen this season. You can't just count on the explosive plays. You have to have the dump-offs. You have to have the checkdowns, and you have to have a good tight end room. And I think that you can probably look to some of the best teams in recent history and look at who their tight ends were. And a lot of them have really good tight ends. That's a very important part of today's NFL offense. But let's also talk about the wide receiver room. Let's talk about just in general where these dropped passes and these inconsistent wide receivers, because I think it's important to note that as well. Because while Michael Pittman has been good throughout his career, Alec Pierce is having an explosive year. Adonai Mitchell's had a rough start, and who knows what that's about. But the Colts are ranked tied for 5th with the Bills and Buccaneers for the worst drop passes. So they have 18 drop passes on the season, which might not seem like a lot. But when you're talking about a guy and the media is addressing Anthony Richardson and talking about his completion percentage, I think it's really important to note that Anthony Richardson's completion percentage, when adjusted, is actually is average or above average on the season. The game against the Jets, I don't know if you saw the stat, but the stat was that Anthony Richardson had an adjusted completion percentage of 85%, which is unbelievable, which is a really, really good above-average completion percentage. Now, again, it's the Jets, so I think it's important to take it with a grain of salt, but it's still an NFL team, and it's an NFL team that I think a lot of us had as a Super Bowl favorite, or at least in the playoffs at the beginning of the season. So it's not for nothing. But he definitely did a much better job of picking them apart. Now, obviously, struggled a little bit last week against the Lions, given that the Lions are a really good defense, all of that. But I think that it's important to note that if the Colts are not able to bring in more help on the tight end position and give Anthony Richardson a check down, to give him someone to look to, I think it's going to really, really continue to halter or to hold up his performance. And we're going to, and at least his development, and we're going to be putting on these whatever the opposite of rose-colored glasses is when looking at Anthony Richardson. It's important to note about the weapons around him and the consistency of those weapons around him. So I think the Colts really need to address this before the beginning of next season. And obviously it's probably a little late in the year to address it this season, but I think that one of the key issues with this Colts offense is the lack of tight end production.